statement of the Shitpost Calligrapher regarding strange music originating from the upstairs flat. Statement taken directly from subject, July 1st, 2022.
Everyone who's ever rented is probably familiar with the experience. I've never heard of a landlord that bothered with soundproofing their floors. You might get lucky if you find yourself one of the less bastardly landlords and actually get some soundproof walls, but soundproof floors are basically unheard of. So, you go through your leases constantly listening to whatever nonsense noises the tenants of the upstairs flat happen to be making. Unhappy couple screaming, happy couple screwing, and Ringo playing the drums at 1 in the morning. Maybe not the Ringo, but a Ringo, you know? And when you're a tenant hopping from place to place, you never pay much attention to the other tenants moving in and out, because you're going to be gone before you know it too. Well, maybe if you're the sort that stirs up trouble with the landlord by forming a tenants union. I'm not the sort, but I'd join one if they invited me. Maybe then we could demand some soundproof floors. It was sometime around 5 years ago. I said I wasn't the sort to pay attention to the other tenants coming and going, and I'm not, but it would have been impossible to ignore this one. He was a tall guy, and otherwise bland except for the suit. He wore a colorful suit with optical illusion lines, you know, like when you stare at something and the lines go all wibbly? He spent 4 days moving in as truck after truck pulled up, unloaded, and left. I didn't think anything of it, not really. I just noticed, was all. He never introduced himself, so I nicknamed him Mr. Wobbles because of the wibbly lines. Sometimes I think I'm funny like that. Well, Mr. Wobbles moved into the flat above mine, and he was single, so there wasn't any screaming or screwing, and he didn't play the drums either. But he did have a taste for classical music. And he'd play sonatas and symphonies. I liked it. It was nice. I don't think Mr. Wobbles ever played the same piece twice, so the music just got more esoteric as things went on. It was still nice, but one time I was cooking steak for dinner, and I swear I heard a cow moo in time to the music. Funny thing about hearing an unexplained cow's moo in the middle of the city, you think it's real for a moment, before you dismiss the thought as farcical. There was another time I definitely heard and felt actual cannon fire. So I looked it up, and Tchaikovsky composed music that used cannons, but since he didn't repeat himself, and he obviously hadn't used real cannons, I wasn't expecting the cannons again anytime soon. The tension started rising when he ran out of classical music, or maybe he just got bored of it. I'm sure there's enough classics that you'd never actually run out if you played forever. But he definitely changed genres. It started with American jazz. Then there were bagpipes, then a week of slightly wrong Beatles covers. It got real modern after the Beatles. Jazz was fine, and I'd always enjoyed the gut-punch rhythm of bagpipes, but I never really liked the Beatles, and I definitely didn't like what he started playing after. Gangnam Style wasn't particularly worse than anything he'd played, but it's what broke the camel's back, and it made me decide I'd been patient enough. I knocked on his door first, hoping to talk to him. But when he didn't respond, I wrote him a note telling him to either turn the new music down or go back to playing classical, and that if he didn't, I'd complain to the landlord. Gangnam Style was the last song that Mr. Wobbles played after that, because he just only played Gangnam Style afterwards. Remixes, reduxes, renditions, all on repeat. I called the landlord about the problem. She said she didn't care about whatever tenant drama we were up to and told me to call the police if it was bothering me. So I called the police. Mr. Wobbles went silent as they arrived, and they said there's nothing they can do about a noise complaint if they don't hear the noise while they're there. The music started back up about 10 minutes after they left earshot. I could always hear it filtering through the upstairs flat. Variations of every sound, obviously that song, but composed for this instrument or that instrument with different lyricists. One version was just completely normal, but the size lyrics had been completely replaced with cows mooing. About a week after I'd left the note, the Tchaikovsky cannons were back, shaking my apartment as they belted Gangnam Style throughout the night. I don't know why no one else in the flat complained, but I swear I'm not making this up. I could feel the cannons firing. They felt so real. I called the police again. It stopped just long enough for them to show up and then leave. I called them again and again about the cannons, and they never heard a pip. They had the gall to tell me to stop making false reports, so I told them to do their goddamn jobs. Of course, they thought that meant finding me for making false complaints, and not for arresting the man making the noise. After 12 hours of Gangnam-style cannon fire, he stopped playing it constantly. Instead, he'd only play it if I was trying to sleep. Anytime I laid my head down, the cannon fire would return. I wasn't getting any rest, the police weren't doing anything about it, and my neighbors apparently heard nothing. I was half prepared to murder Mr. Wobbles myself when I marched up to his apartment after a third sleepless night. I was going to kick in the door, beat his ass at the very least, and destroy his speaker system. The door was open. Mr. Wobbles sat, dressed in the same suit I first saw him in, with his back towards the door. He was holding an unusually long conductor's baton. Around him were an arrangement of musical instruments. Some I was familiar with: guitars, drums, a tuba, some violins, a bagpipe, and many, many more that I couldn't identify. Whatever instruments they were playing themselves, following his baton. I was running on deliriously little sleep, which is why I didn't respond at all to the sight of a cow coming into my view from the other room and mooing a familiar moo. I know how silly it sounds, and it's hard to explain why I was so afraid of all of this, but I guess I can laugh at the situation now, because then I noticed the cannon on the other side of Mr. Wobbles pointing directly at me. He turned his head halfway towards me and smiled. The lines between his teeth were even wibbly. His baton went wibbly and wobbly too as he picked up the tempo. Whoop, whoop, whoop. I dove out of the way, falling into the percussion section of his mad orchestra. My ears split to the deafening sound of point-blank cannon fire. The cannonball was embedded into the wall and was smoldering in the spot where I'd been standing. He raised his baton again and again, and I ran as far as I could, trying to outpace the sound of the music, but my ears are ringing. Whoop, whoop, whoop. My feet were pounding. Whoop, whoop. My heart was beating, and just and my lungs were screaming, open Gangnam style. I ran until I collapsed. I woke up in a hospital. The doctors puzzled over me and my inexplicable 50 to 70% hearing loss. I guess because I never explained it to them that I could hear just fine, but everything was being drowned out by something much louder. Because I could still hear it. Can still hear it, actually. Mr. Wobble's renditions of Gangnam Style are still echoing in my ears. And anywhere there's a ceiling, I hear it. I hear Gangnam Style filtering in from the upstairs flat.
Statement ends. I suppose that this is what we get for inviting bloggers from the site called Tumblr to submit statements. The platform is already rife with deliberately odd and outlandish anecdotes, and users often seem to pride themselves on, well, how bizarre they can be and the subsequent reactions of others. Nevertheless, out of all of the submissions that we received, this one was the most promising. Most of the others were simple ghost stories and urban legend-type experiences, likely the results of overactive imaginations, drugs or alcohol, or teenage aspirations towards 5 minutes of internet fame. Even in light of the statement's more puzzling elements, I am still loath to consider its validity, largely due to the username it was submitted under, the Shitpost Calligrapher. Despite Tim's jokes, I am not entirely ignorant of digital culture and online trends, and do actually know what exactly a shitpost is. While I am still tempted to chalk this experience up to some sort of stress-induced auditory hallucination, perhaps resulting from a lack of sleep, which certainly could have been caused by particularly loud upstairs neighbours, all interactions with the statement giver have revealed her remarkable hearing loss and a rather extreme level of paranoia. Sasha managed to track down a phone number, and I had Martin attempt to contact the calligrapher. Martin, in turn, reported that he placed multiple calls, but that only a few were ever answered, and that even those which were answered did not provide any opportunity to obtain additional information. He said that those calls were all answered by someone who seemed to barely be able to hear him, responding only by shouting things such as, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you over this stupid music." There do appear to be multiple police reports regarding noise complaints and related false reports, and further investigation by Sasha revealed hospital records of a person with inexplicable hearing loss and auditory trauma. Tim also managed to follow up with the statement giver's former landlord, who confirmed that the calligrapher submitted multiple noise complaints both to him and to the police, though he claimed that he never received similar complaints from any of the other tenants, even those who lived above the flat in question. It does seem, though, that the landlord could not locate any sort of documentation for this Mr. Wobbles and his stay in the building, though he swore that the paperwork should have been there, and confirmed that there had definitely been a tenant renting the flat above the calligrapher's during the time period indicated. It's fascinating, though. While this conductor upstairs doesn't seem like a complete match, his wibbly qualities bear some resemblance to Michael's more surreal attributes. Perhaps this case could be related to whatever Michael is a manifestation of, though the presence of a cow does introduce some complications in classifying the statement. They only ever seem to appear in statements regarding butchers and meat-packing facilities and such, of which this one certainly does not address. Additionally, music only ever seems to be a theme of statements dealing with intense violence and war, though I suppose that Grifter's bone did seem to induce a level of madness that subsequently led to aggression, but still, I'm not entirely sure what to make of this one. Personally, I'd just appreciate it if my assistants would cease playing Gangnam Style over and over like it was once again 2012. End recording.